there is opportunity to bring on the talent that you need on a fractional basis to build the infrastructure that you need from a people's perspective. Welcome to the Fractional Edge podcast, the ultimate podcast where we unlock the power of workforce planning and discuss the rapidly growing fractional executive staffing strategies to supercharge your business.
Meet your hosts, Carol Fraser, a workforce planning expert, fractional chief human resources officer, and founder of C4 Talent.
And Jason Hewitt, the sensei of marketing, fractional chief marketing officer, and founder of Fifth Degree Marketing.
We'll bring you insights from seasoned pros, inspiring success stories, and actionable strategies to optimize your valued workforce.
Don't miss this chance to upgrade your business with top industry leaders in today's competitive landscape. So tune in and learn how to unleash your competitive edge.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fractional Edge podcast. Today, I'm really excited because I get the opportunity to put my co-host in the hot seat, Carol Fraser. So Carol, thanks for coming on. How are you?
You know, I'm doing well. No complaints today. The weather isn't bad, so but if you do hear a little snoring in the background, that's my dog.
Okay, I've got one of those too. So I just want to give a little bit of context to the audience because they don't know either one of us. So let's just kind of start off. If you could tell the audience a bit about how did you get into being a fractional CHRO, if I got, did I get the letters correct?
You got the letters correct.
Okay. Before we do that, let's define what CHRO is, just so everyone is on the same page.
Awesome. So that is a Chief Human Resources Officer. And really, it is the head of the Human Resources Department. Now, nowadays, we call it people in development or people in culture, or some people still have it down as human resources. Ultimately, it is the department within every organization that manages operations around employees. So whether that be all the people ops, which is your systems, your payroll, your benefits, your immigration, your policies, your procedures, all of that kind of stuff. Then, of course, you've got your people experience, and that's performance management, that is talent management, that is your learning and development. Then you have your talent acquisition, which is your recruiting. There are so many elements within human resources. I think right now, as I'm in the midst of writing an ebook, I've come up with 26 distinct areas within human resources that are truly could be specialists and or more broad generalists. So it kind of depends on your organization. And the CHRO oversees all of that. We focus on listening to the strategy of the organization, understanding its plans, its needs, its goals, and also understanding kind of who our stakeholders are, where the future of the organization might go. And then what we do is listen with a people filter on what does the organization need to achieve those strategies and goals. So that's what a chief human resources officer's role really is in theory. Now, in many organizations, it can vary. If you're a department of one and you're wearing all the hats, you may not actually have that breadth or depth of scope. If you work for larger organizations that have tens, if not hundreds of people in human resources, they're able to truly focus on a lot of those individual specialties. So it kind of depends on the organization that you're in, exactly what you would be doing as a CHRO. So flexibility is kind of super important as a fractional CHRO, because the more that you've had exposure to, the quicker you are to value and impact for a client.
Tell me a little bit about, let's go back into your history. Have you always been in the human resources field? Tell me a little bit about your story.
Oh, it's a fun little story. So I'm originally from California, born and raised, and I actually started in Northern California, where I'm from, working in the music industry, or at least that's the part where I start my resume, because prior to that, I don't have retail and stuff on top of it. But I actually started in marketing. I worked for a music management firm, and part of my job was A&R, and I would go out and listen to bands in the Bay Area. And if we thought that it was somebody who we wanted to rep, I would give them my card, and then they would in turn, call the office and talk to our people. It was a little more difficult when we started growing. I think we got up to around 65 employees. And so at some point there was that pivot point. Do I want to keep doing these types of things, or do I want to do the operations? Because I was being asked to do both. So staying out until 2 a.m. in the morning and listening to bands, and then all of a sudden coming in at 8 or 9 in the morning and having to do operations was a little much. I mean, albeit I know 20-year-olds have a lot of energy, but eventually you do start to go, I'd really like to sleep and eat. So I chose the operations route, and that's where we, started to grow. I was really more of a generalist operations person, but being that we repped talent, we were heavily leaning in on people skills. So it almost was a natural movement into overseeing a lot of the people components. And I'm saying even today, we've got a lot of people who have freelance populations, and really talent is talent. And even though those were our clients, people are people and they like to be cared for. So it kind of morphed itself into that. I had been going to college to get my degree in liberal arts, and I started pivoting and taking classes in labor relations, because back then that's kind of what human resources offerings were in college. So I actually moved from Northern California to Southern California, and that's where my HR career kind of took off. I started working in larger marketing organizations. I actually did not go into music. I tried, but there was this big old, hoopla happening in LA at the time around music, and the big companies that were repping things kind of all dissolved and were into individual recording companies. And I was like, ooh, I thought I was going to be a big fish in a little pond, but now I'm a little fish in a big pond. So I pivoted and I started working for a marketing company. Fun fact, they were the distributors of all of the big kids meals, toys that come in the Burger King kids meals. So like when Toy Story was coming out, my whole office, my whole desk was just covered in Toy Story figurines. So, and I still have those. I wonder if they're worth anything. So I had moved into marketing. I had spent some time in technology. That's a fun little story that I'm sure I'll probably have time to tell in a future podcast episode. So I had moved into technology. I was working in entertainment. I had the joy of working at all the big studios. And then eventually I got tapped on the shoulder by some people who I had worked with prior that lived out here on the East Coast. And they said, hey, we're starting this massive, company. Would you be interested in coming out and running our HR? So in 1998, I moved out for the first time out from California to the East Coast, and I ran human resources for a distribution company. And so that was my first foray as a CHRO. And it was really exciting because we were doing mergers and acquisitions. We acquired 13 companies in 9 different states in 9 months.
Any specific industry?
All in the distribution industry. So these were all little competitors, and we kind of pulled them all together into one big company. So yeah, really exciting. And then I pivoted again because I moved to Boston where I got married, and I started working in marketing again for a larger marketing organization. And then 9/11 happened. And so the whole world shifted, and that's when I actually started my own company. And so I had my own consulting company for about 14 years, doing HR operations, general operations, and then my husband was a technologist, an emerging technologist. So we kind of parlayed our two expertise. And we ended up actually partnering mostly within the entertainment industry. A lot of my contacts, because of a lot of those small little companies now starting, they didn't really have what they needed from an operations, people ops, or technology. So we kind of swooped in and took about 40 clients on over 14 years. We did some big things, we did some little things, and it was a lot of fun and really just enjoyed it to death. Got a lot of exposure, if got a lot of depth as well as breadth within the human resources field. And I think that that's why, as I'm writing this ebook, I'm recognizing, there are so many different nuances within human resources that I've had my opportunity to touch on a good amount of them, not all of them. So, yeah. And then from there, in 2014, I pivoted back to being an employee. I worked for a global fintech organization. And that was great because I got my teeth cut on a lot of global. And then I also worked for a very large healthcare organization. And was working with that healthcare organization during COVID. So no sleep for the weary on that one. Then, of course, I swung the pendulum because I was like, I can't work every single day for the rest of my life because that's honestly what it was. And so I swung the pendulum and went to work for a small marketing company, during which time, still COVID, finished my MBA, finished my coaching certification, even though I'd been doing coaching for over 20 years as part of my roles, got the credentials and opened up my company, C4 Talent, in July of 2021. And that's my story.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I want to spend probably an episode on the whole COVID, how that was working during that period of time. So let's dive in or dig in a little bit more to kind of current day, because when we first met, and we'll give the audience just a little bit of background, I met you on Fractionals United, really great platform for fractional executives, and we had, basically when I met you, I'm an entrepreneur and I knew a little bit about HR. Actually, I thought I knew a lot until I met you, and then I realized, why I'm in marketing. I love the fact that you've got that, multidisciplinary background. I think is really unique. So you can speak, other terms such as marketing, finance, things like that. But let's talk a little bit about, what you actually do, because when I first met you, my thought was, oh, you're fractional, human resources officer. So you're placing people. That's kind of I think the go-to, which is not at all the case, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you do currently?
And it's so funny that you say that because we actually plugged into ChatGPT, what is human resources, and it comes back as talent acquisition. So even ChatGPT doesn't really understand the depth and breadth of human resources. So myself, look, like I said, I've got a whole company and a whole slew of experts behind us. As a fractional CHRO, I can go in and do lots, right? Because I do have a litany of people who can support in other areas. But where I put my focus and why I was so interested in starting the Fractional Edge was around workforce planning. We are in a significant pivot point here in our society, in our talent, in the way businesses do business. And we're running up against a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities. And I think what I'm hoping to do is pivot people's mindset on what the future of work could look like. So I lean in as a fractional CHRO as the workforce planning expert. Because workforce planning, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's about taking the business needs and the current and future goals and strategies, and that's where it meets the talent and the skills necessary to achieve those goals and plans. And if an organization, regardless of size, takes a pause, adds the people person into the conversation, and that person is allowing a different voice to come in and say, I see where you want to go. What does that look like from a talent perspective? Because to get to where you want to go, you need people. And what kind of people, what skills do they need to have? And then, of course, if you want to retain those people, what kind of experience do you want them to have, right? So what I do is try to get in there from that lens so that, when we talk workforce planning, we have our inputs. That's the strategies, the plans, the job content, internal and external stakeholders. And then from there, you create what's called the career experience. That is where you have your job architecture, which the easiest way to explain job architecture is how many people and different types of people do you need to screw in a light bulb? And so you got to make sure you've got that level of foundation, because if you're just throwing resources at an urgent problem, once that urgent problem is solved, what happens with the resource, right? And we need to create a better foundation in that career experience so that all of the outputs that come from workforce planning, which people are doing in human resources every single day, but many HR professionals don't really kind of understand how it ladders up to the strategic plan on a current and future need. So the outputs are things like recruiting, learning and development, employee engagement, any number of things. So you think of all those things that we're working on, right? Leadership development programs, all of those things need to ladder up to the what we need, right? And the why we need it is the inputs. And so that is where I tend to come in, because I can help you with all the outputs. But a lot of times I ask the HR folks that I coach, how impactful or effective was the program that you put together? And they kind of hem and haw and they say, well, it was good for some people. It didn't really, I think it was good, or they really don't do that assessment of what those outputs are doing. And they may not be agile enough to morph whatever those outputs are, given if the strategy changes, right? So those are things that I tend to come in as a fractional CHRO and focus on, because I don't want to put outputs, I don't want to do busy work. And the only way that we can continue to elevate the impact and value that human resources has on an organization is to continue to be at the table and doing outputs that are directly aligned and showing top and bottom line impact if we're in the room listening to the strategy and plans. So I'll kind of pause there. That was a lot to take in.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're fairly metrics driven.
Very metrics driven. I mean, if we can report it, that's great. I think hardly the things that some people, and thank goodness there's more technology out there nowadays, but the hard part is people don't know how to measure, right? I just did a speaking engagement and I said, you have to ask the question first, what questions or objectives are we trying to report here? Because you don't want to put data out for data's sake. You've got to make sure that you're building the right questions, that you're building the right programs to answer those questions, and that you're building the right reporting to ensure that you're staying on track.
Okay, that makes sense. And for the people that you work with, what would a typical company look like in terms of size, number of employees? Do you have a target audience that you typically work with?
Yeah, I think I like to stay in the smaller realm. I think the U.S. is built on small businesses. I like to support small businesses. I am a small business. So I really like to stay under 1,000 employees. I always like to say I've had exposure to 75,000. I've been super impactful at 3,000. I'm a rock star at under 1,000. I am killer beyond belief at under 500, but you give me a company that's less than 500 and that company is going to turn into 1,000 employees, because we're going to have the opportunity earlier on to build the right foundation. Because that's what it's really all about, is did you build the right foundation at the right time? Because if you're thinking you want to be 1,000 employees, $100 million, but you're waiting until you get to 50 or get to 100 or get to 200 before you actually do the foundational work, then you're keep putting yourself behind the eight ball. So I guess I look at it as I have a greater opportunity for value and impact if I'm in on the early stages and able to coach and design and define the foundation than if I get called in at 3,000 employees and most of that foundation is not there. And I'm usually hired because the outputs that HR is doing are ineffective. And so my first questions are always, was HR at the table when you told them to do those outputs? And do they really understand the link between those outputs to your strategic plan?
Yeah, so this was where after I had listened to you kind of explain that, just how strategic you think. It makes, in all of our disciplines, we know what strategy means to us. But I hadn't considered going that deep in terms of human resources. What would you say, obviously there's been this massive shift, with COVID and there's more remote, and this fractional category has pretty much exploded. But how would you guide a potential client or someone, maybe a business owner, thinking about leveraging a fractional executive with your background versus bringing someone in on a W-2 basis and hiring them? Can you outline some of the pluses and the minuses?
So I think the pluses really come from the fact that you have a been there, done that individual. I coach and mentor HR professionals at all levels. There is opportunity for people at a W-2 level. However, if you bring in somebody who you can, quote, afford, you may not be getting the breadth or depth needed to achieve the results you're expecting out of your HR team. So if you bring in a fractional executive with 20, 30 years of experience and you're able to leverage the knowledge, the experience to build what you need for your organization, and then together strategize what W-2 do you need on the ground for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Because I find that many organizations that are even under 100 employees are hiring people who either don't know what they don't know. God bless them. You can't know everything. But they're hiring people that don't know what they don't know, or they're over hiring, right? Now they're bringing in somebody who is like me as a W-2, paying mid six figures, and I'm sitting here running payroll. Is that really how you want to spend your money? So it really is an opportunity to have a conversation with CEOs, owners, PE firms, investors, to say, there is opportunity to bring on the talent that you need on a fractional basis to build the infrastructure that you need from a people's perspective to reach your strategy goals without under hiring or over hiring.
Okay, so this is kind of a fun question, and we'll give the audience some insight as to what types of scenarios you enter in on. And you talked a little bit about this, but can you think of either an extremely challenging scenario that you were invited to be a part of, or likewise maybe a success story that you could share with the audience?
I think when we think about going into organizations that are going through transition from pre-COVID to post-COVID, and they still have a desired vision to that they want to do X, Y, and Z for their clients. They have a mission that has been there since they started their organization. For CEOs who have been in business for over 20 years and have been successful for the majority of that time, to help them pivot and prepare for what the workforce looks like now is really where fractional HR people can be highly successful. I went into an organization that was in just this kind of situation. They had underhired for a long time. So, which basically in my book means that you hired people, gave them a lofty title, but their skill set was still very low level. And you were getting operators with very little strategy. And the majority of the people strategy was falling on the owners. And while that's great, that's not their magic, right? Their magic was something else. That's why they started their company. And now we're asking them to stretch themselves to be people strategists. And everybody likes to profess that they're people strategists. It just happens to be the only thing I focus on. I don't focus on anything else other than people strategy. So when I went into the organization, we had those tough conversations. And I was only in there for, call it maybe 5, 6 hours a week, to really trying to elevate the awareness and helping them see a different way of thinking. And when I did that, they were able to see, okay, so what we're telling me is we've been kind of going pretty well. We got lucky in that people were fat and happy, getting paid well. We got big bonuses. But now that we actually need to think less on the monetary and more on the engagement, I have to think differently. And I said, yes, you have to think differently. So, how do we attract and retain the talent that we need? And what talent do we need? They had never done a talent to task assessment. They did not know what their true pipeline was. And if they had won all of this business, did they have the right skill sets in the organization to actually perform what they were pitching? And we never want to, we as HR people never really appreciate the hurry up and wait or the fire drills of, I need 5 people tomorrow. God bless America. I really hope that someday that we can just tap somebody on the shoulder and they have all the skills that we need, but we know that that's not reality. So when we go in, we have to really say, let me see what's in the pipeline. And they always look at me and go, why is HR interested in seeing what's in the pipeline? And I explain to them, because if you want me to have a pipeline of people prepared to do those tasks, I need to be involved in what's going on the day to day, not just doing the operations. So the success of that story was we did all of that, right? We finally got them to open their eyes and see it in a different way, include HR into things like the daily or weekly operations meetings, the pipeline, the sales funnel meetings. And we built performance management that allowed us to understand the skills and competencies that our people had and what their true availability was, and then be able to better plan for those wins of that pipeline. So that's a great success story that I like to bring up.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Let's talk a bit about, let's say best practices or strategies. What can you share in terms of how an organization might be able to implement better workforce planning, moving forward into the future? Can you give some, 2 or 3 tips that would help the audience understand a bit more about that?
When I think about it, it's kind of it's a multi-tiered answer. So some of the tips, the first tip is include your HR people. You don't know, they cannot support you in your strategies and what your bottom line results are if they're in the dark. So my first tip is consider involving your HR people who are accountable. I love my racy, who are accountable for the outputs, and make sure that they have line of sight. So that's my first tip. The second tip I would say is, if you don't have someone who has the competency, because competencies are learned over time, they're honed, they're the sharpening of your skills, right? And so if you don't have that, that's when you want to consider, what can I do? Who can I partner with to not only help me meet my objectives in the organization today, but also upskill or mentor my current HR staff so that they're more ready for the next opportunity. So that's my second tip. And I guess my third tip is remember that people are what make you successful. And I know that is a poster in somebody's room, right? But really what you have to remember is people are not commodities. You cannot pick up one person who has an extra 10 hours and plop them over here to do a skill that's not in their wheelhouse. So it's an iterative, ongoing process. You always need to stay on top of who your people are, what their driving forces are, what is making them wake up in the morning to add value to your organization, and keep a pulse on that. Because if you turn a blind eye and go, well, we do our employee engagement once a year, you're missing it. You need to either train your leaders to learn how to do that, or you need to bring in a partner that can help do that from, anonymously, so that, you're finding information out without holding, all the stories. I know a lot of people prefer to partner with outside people to kind of do those temperature tests. But I'm still a big advocate of leadership development. I think every study that's been out there has shown in the new way of working, leadership effectiveness is the number one thing that is going to help organizations achieve their results. So that is an output of workforce planning.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well spoken. We've got just a minute here to wrap up, but what we'll do is we'll put some resources in the show notes just for the audience, maybe some of your secret weapons that you've used over the years and other resources. And it was a real pleasure. We will come back. You will have another session and be in the hot seat again because I want to learn more, especially about the COVID
And I get
story.
to put you in the hot seat next.
Yeah, we'll get there. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Carol.
Thanks so much. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Fractional Edge podcast. Stay tuned because we have a lot of great fractional executives coming up, and we don't want you to miss all of the insights that they have to give. If you're a CEO, an owner, a founder, a PE firm, a leader of any kind, this is the kind of information that's going to help you elevate your business outcomes. So thank you so much for listening.
Thanks. Take care. We hope you enjoyed our insightful discussions and feel inspired to unleash your competitive edge.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with the latest episodes. You can also connect with our podcast guests to benefit from their expertise and explore collaboration opportunities by visiting our website, thefractionaledge.com. Join us next time as we continue to explore the power of workforce planning and fractional executives in today's competitive business landscape. Until then, take care and keep growing.